Johnny Rutherford, thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Well, I've been looking forward to it,
I've been
Kyle.
looking forward to it. You don't know how much I've been looking forward to it. And I always start this with guys that drove. How did you get into racing? Did somebody in your family race?
My dad was an adventuresome sort. We always had airplanes, boats, or race cars around when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And so he took me to the midget races, probably in 47 or, 46, 47. And I was hooked. I wanted to be a race car driver when I got bigger.
Yeah, the first time you saw one, that's what you wanted to do.
First time I saw, and midget racing right after the war was very popular because people were hungry for exciting things other than the war to be involved with. And so it was good. And this particular, the car that I'm restoring right now is a Curtis Craft midget race car with a little flathead V860 Ford engine in it. And I watched it race in Tulsa, Oklahoma when I was a kid. And, just kind of grew up loving auto racing. It was what I wanted to do.
When did you start as a driver? Do you, and
I actually didn't get started till I was 21.
See, that in itself is a little bit fascinating to me. You were born in 38.
Yeah.
I think my dad was born in 37. My grandfather wouldn't let my dad drive a race car until he was 21. Until he was 21. He said, when you turn 21, you can get in one. Before that, you're just going to work on them. So you didn't start until 21. Why?
Actually, it was just busy. Didn't know about racing around. I was working to make a living, and one night in the club meeting for my hot rod club, one of the guys said, "I've got to leave early and go help my brother put the engine in his dirt track car." Well, that set me straight up in my chair. I said, "Dirt track car?" He said, "Yeah, they race every Friday night over in Dallas at the Devil's Bowl Speedway." So I went out the next day with him, and they let me drive the car. Boy, I was hooked and ready, and I started looking for something to build my race car out of. And I found a 32 Chevrolet Coupe in Grapevine, Texas, and it was had been a race car at one time, but I made it more of a race car when we got it back to Fort Worth to my clubhouse, the Hot Rod Club, and they helped me build my first race car, and that was, rolled over into 1959 when I started driving at the Devil's Bowl.
So you started at Devil's Bowl in a modified stock car, not in a midget, but in a stock car.
Yes.
The sprint cars you drove, and I want to be real clear for people that are watching this, are not the sprint cars that we see today with those big wings and all that downforce and all that. A lot of power, but right on the edge all the time.
Right. The cars weighed just at or over 1,000 pounds.
Yeah.
That's pretty light for a
really
car.
Light.
And sprint car racing was great, but it was open cockpit.
Yeah.
We had a roll bar behind the driver's head just to keep it on him if it went over.
Yeah.
Keep it off of him. And
a true roll bar. That's what it was for. If it rolled over, to keep you out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. During my time, I've lost a lot of friends and competitors in race cars.
Yeah.
It was very dangerous back then, and still is, but it's better because they protect the driver more.
So in a very short period of time, we've gone from the dirt modified to running in Wisconsin and running sprint cars and midgets and moving on. And in '63, you're at Indy. So that's 59, 60, 61. That's like 4 or 5 years. You're already at Indy. What was Indy like for you then? That first time to roll into that place, to have a ride, and to be there.
It's like driving into Darlington or Daytona for you.
Yeah.
Get that little cold chill. And it happens. People say, well, believe me, to drive under the, through the gate into Indianapolis or any major track like Darlington or Daytona, you get that chill if you're with it.
Yeah.
And I made Indianapolis in '63, But I made it to Daytona prior to that.
Yeah, we'll get to that later.
Okay.
We'll get to that one later. We'll get to that one later. But because on the Indy side, what was, when you were on the grid that first race, to have that crowd, to have that, and it's a different place today than it was then. Everything's evolved. But at the same time, to be a kid from Texas,
Yeah.
a kid from Kansas via Texas, and be down here, and all of a sudden that dream is realized. What was it like that day?
It was incredible, and the beginning of the learning curve.
Yeah.
You know, you took everything that happened and categorized it. You know, okay, I got to remember this, or you know, you put it in your library, and you practice for the month, and qualify. You make the race, and you study that, and you have the last practice, or you have the practice for qualifying on first day for the pole day, and the crowd is 250,000 people.
Yeah.
You know, and so
crazy.
And it's in, you know, wow. And you come in race morning and you don't, you know, you're focused on thinking about the car and the situation, and you go out to the line, and it's overwhelming to see the crowd, all of the color and the people, and you know, you think, you know, where was turn one again? You know, it's down there buried in this shadow, and anyway, it was a giant learning curve.
So you run the first time in '63, and then you mentioned earlier, you lost a lot of good friends and a lot of people in this sport. And I remember as a kid playing in the infield at races with kids, and then their mom would put them in a car and I would never see them again because something had happened to their father.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was a different time in the sport, and I don't think a lot of people understand that period. And it took a lot to go back the next Sunday. It took a lot out of a family and out of a driver and out of people. But you were involved in probably one of the most famous incidents there with Eddie Sachs and Dave McDonald. What happened there? That was a horrendous accident.
That was, yes. It was, as you say, horrendous. It was a worst accident probably to ever happen at Indianapolis. Yeah. And it was only on the second lap of the race. Davey McDonald was driving for Mickey Thompson, and Davey was, every time you saw a picture of Davey in the Speed Sport or magazine, he was sideways in a sports car. He just, you know, he drove hard. I started outside in the fifth row, and Eddie Sachs was next to me. I think Davey was one row back, and we came down for the green flag, and Eddie forged ahead of me, you know, with his car, and I thought, there's Eddie. He always goes to the front. I'll just hang on to him and see how he does it or what happens. So we started and went through the first turn and went to the first lap, started the second lap, and I went across the short chute, and Davey came running by me on the inside, just the engine just bellowing, you know, and he even put two wheels at the edge of the grass and brought little, you know, the grass and stuff out on the track, went off, and I thought, whew, boy, there goes the guy that's either going to win this thing or crash. And I was on Eddie's bumper, kind of keeping an eye on him on the closing rate and so on, and saw this cloud of dust and this flash of red race car.
McDonald is out of control.
And it was Davey. He spun and hit that wall that angled out to the track, and he was running in gasoline.
Drivers attempt to thread their way through the spreading flames. Some make it, others don't.
He and Eddie Sachs were the only two cars in the race with gasoline.
No way.
Yeah. Davy's car hit and exploded in this big orange ball and black flame, and they went across the track. And as we came around the turn and up to the short chute, or the straightaway, Davy's car was sliding backwards in this big ball of flame. Eddie was, I can remember, he had a fluorescent circle painted on top of his helmet, but I could see that on either side of his roll bar. He was looking where he was going to go, and at the last, and I was right on his bumper, and had my foot buried on the brakes, and at the last instant, he went left just enough, and I went right because I saw the gap between Davy's tailpipes and the wall.
Yeah.
Just, maybe that far.
Yeah, just
I thought I could break through there. Eddie's car impacted, center punched Davy, and his car reared up, and I went under Eddie's right rear. It put a skid mark of his tire tread up the nose of my Watson Roadster, and I went over him and on top, put tire marks on top of the wall that I saw the next day, and I came down on the other side, and I was, the car was on fire. It was a sad day for all of us. Everybody loved Eddie Sachs. He was a great guy, and Davy was a new young guy, and it just, to have that happen kind of takes the edge off of it. The conclusion to the story, end of the story, I got back to the garage from the hospital, went over and they doctored my neck. I had second-degree burns on the back of my neck. Got back to the garage just as the car came from the fuel shed where they drained the rest of the fuel that had in it, if any, and it came around and they guys pushed it in the garage, and Herb Porter was my crew chief, and he, asked me if I was okay. I said, yeah, and everything. So he unlatched the hood on the, driver's side of the car, the right side, raised it up, and we both standing there looking into by the engine.
Yeah.
And there was some sand and a little pea gravel and a piece of windshield material about that big, and this lump laying back in there. And Herb reached in and picked it up, and it brushed the sand off of it, the dirt, and it was a lemon, and it had a shoestring hanging through, had been punched through it, and it cut the end off of it.
Yeah.
And Herb says, well, where in the world do you reckon that came from? And somebody at the door said, oh my God. Herb said, what? He said, Eddie had that around his neck.
No way.
Yeah.
70s, and this is where I remember Johnny Rutherford, because all of a sudden I'm 12, 13 years old. I'm spending a lot more time. First time I went to Riverside was 68, and I saw Dan Gurney drive for the Wood Brothers, and I've told it before. He drove, and he run number 121. I'd never seen a stock car with three numbers on it, you know what I mean, which just was fascinating. And we'd go up in the S's, and my dad and Dale Emmon would say, well, what's this guy come up to here? And I'm like, well, he's not going fast. And they'd show you the stopwatch, and he was like 8/10 faster than anybody there.
Else.
Anybody else. It was like, that was just fascinating. But as we roll into the 70s, 73, 76, 80, you won the pole, but you won the race. In 74, 76, and 80, you were the guy at Indianapolis. When they rolled in, they had to go through Johnny Rutherford. What was that period of time? What was the 70s like for Johnny Rutherford as a driver?
It was, obviously good. I really, had looked forward to. I'd always told my wife, Betty, I said, if I ever find anybody that wants to go racing as badly as I do, I'll be a winner. Well, I did that when I found McLaren and Tyler Alexander and the crew. They hired me the winter of 72, and they brought the car to the Speedway, and I ran it, and it understeered or pushed terribly. We tried everything in the world to try to do that. And I found out last year when I went to McLaren in England to present the car that I'd won with at Indy for them, from the guy that designed the car, Gordon Kopic. I said, what happened when they sent the car back to England? What did you do? He said, I completely redesigned the rear of the car.
Yeah.
He said, and we had our fingers crossed that that would be it. Well, they brought it back. The cars were different.
Yeah.
Had the Offenhauser turbocharged, but it had a wing on his back. It looked like it was as big as his table. It looked like a picnic table back there. And so you had to get the balance of the car and figure out where it wanted to live. And they brought the car out, and we were the first team to ever achieve 200 miles an hour on a stopwatch, unofficially, around the Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
Yeah.
And it's the first time I had ever been able to go flat-footed without lifting all the way around the racetrack.
I can't imagine.
And it was, you know, it was a new era.
Yeah.
And it was the same because the McLaren was a flat bottom car, and you only relied on wings and a little bit of rake in the car maybe for stability. And the Chaparral in '80 was a brand new ball game with the downforce that it created.
Crazy. It's crazy talking to you and going back to your first race there in '61 to winning in '80, the evolution of the car and how much you as a driver had to adjust to that evolution, and the cars had adjusted and the speed went up.
It was, you know, I look back on it now, and, you know, I was blessed.
Yes.
You know, to be able to experience that from Roadster, Watson Roadster, which was very similar to the sprint cars we were racing at the time, just longer.
Yeah.
And then to get to the rear engine cars, and the tires changed from 6-inch tread to 10-inch tread and 12 and then 14-inch tread. You know, it's, you know, I was blessed. I was blessed. I really loved that. That's just the way it was.
All right, so now we're going to go back, and you mentioned it earlier. Now we're going to talk Johnny Rutherford, NASCAR driver. How did you get to Daytona in 1963 with Smokey Yunick?
A rookie at Daytona, former USAC sprint car champion in a '63 Chevy, Johnny Rutherford.
I mean, you may be the only guy I've ever spoken to that drove for Smokey Yunick. You know what I mean? I mean that's the crazy. And he's like an enigma. He's like out there somewhere.
Yeah.
People talk about him all the time, but nobody really knew him. They just know the legend. So how did you end up with Smokey?
I didn't know until several years later. Smokey, after that happened in '63, occasionally we would be on the same programs with the SEMA show or some of those shows, and we'd visit. And I asked Smokey one time, I said, Smokey, why did you hire me? He said, I'd been to a couple of your sprint car races and I liked what I saw. And wow, you know, that's something. The way it all started, I had a friend in Dallas that had a Pontiac dealership. And he called me in winter. We were not racing. I was home, and that was it. He said, do you think you'd ever like to run Daytona 500, stock car race? I said, well, I'm going to say no. I said, you bet I do. I would, you know, that's, yes, that was new. That was the 5th annual Daytona 500 that I went down and performed in. And Smokey said, you're going to need somebody to help you get around here, answer questions for you. So I'll be right back. And he left. About 10 minutes he came back, had 2 guys with him. And he said, here, I want you to meet Fireball Roberts and Joe Weatherly.
Wow.
They were my tutors for Daytona 500.
Wow.
Little Joe was having trouble with his car, and so he didn't offer a lot.
Yeah.
When we met, in his Virginia accent, he said, Kip, this car right, you run flat-footed all the way around here. If this car's right, you can run it flat-footed all the way around here.
That's a good Virginia accent, too.
Yeah,
That was good.
anyway, and so, but Fireball helped quite a bit. You know, he'd see things, or he'd come over and ask me, you know, how you doing?
Yeah.
And it was good. It was a fantastic experience because the car was whew, strong.
Yeah.
165.183 miles an hour, which is what the speed they warm up at now.
Yeah, yeah, but that was an incredible speed.
That was
in 63.
Yes, in 63.
Yes. So you sit on a pole, and you win the qualifying, which was a points race.
Yeah.
The qualifying races were
Right.
points races at that time. Became the youngest guy to win at Daytona at that time. The points races after 71, or the qualifying races weren't. They weren't points races after that. But what did you talk about Smokey, or you talk about Fireball, and you talk about Weatherly, those guys? How did the other drivers treat you when you came in? Because the Southern guys could not be. They weren't always welcoming to people.
Yeah, I don't recall anybody being negative, about this kid coming out of sprint cars or from somewhere other than the Southeast running. I think they all knew about Smokey and his car and how fast it could be if somebody drove it hard enough.
Yeah.
And Smokey asked me, he said, "You want to stay down here and run NASCAR with me?" I said, "Smokey, I want to go to Indianapolis." That was from sprint cars, open wheel cars. Indianapolis was where I wanted to go. And he said, "Yeah, I understand that."
Let me tell you, I wish we had more time, but this has been a pleasure to sit and talk to you.
Well, I've enjoyed it.
And I will say this, growing up and watching you and watching the IndyCar circuit was here, Cup here, you could drive anything, anytime, anywhere. You've been a great ambassador for the sport, and I appreciate everything you've done for motorsports in this country. So thank you very much, sir.
I thank you, and thank you for what you've done.
Thank you, sir.
You tell people what it's all about, and that's great.
Hey Motorsports fans, thanks for watching. Make sure you hit subscribe before you go for all the latest news and highlights across motorsports.